Mom came home early to surprise her daughter, but she saw something she will never forget. Sometimes the truth is right under your nose, behind closed doors, behind ordinary smiles, in seemingly safe places. When Sarah decided to surprise her daughter and came home a day early, she could not even imagine what a nightmare would open up behind those doors. What she saw was only the first layer of what she was about to learn. Sarah Bennett sat in her car by the side of the road, holding a paper cup of coffee. It was a little after 10 in the morning, and she was scheduled to be on shift at a clinic in Chicago. But today was a rare opportunity to leave early. The resident had arrived early, and Sarah had decided to go home without telling her daughter. She wanted to surprise Ellie with something. Breakfast, maybe go for ice cream, buy some new paints. Ellie loved to paint. The house was quiet. The gray, two-story cottage in suburban Naperville looked the same as always. A neatly trimmed lawn, an American flag at the entrance, a neighbor's dog barking somewhere beyond the fence. Sarah inserted the key into the lock and entered, trying not to make any noise. "Ellie?" she called, receiving no answer. "Surprise, I'm home." The house was strangely quiet. Sarah walked deeper, listening. The curtains in the living room were drawn, and there was a smell of something stale. Not dirt, no. More like the windows hadn't been opened in a while. She went upstairs to her daughter's room. The door was closed. Sarah knocked. "Ellie, sunshine?" Came a muffled sound. She opened the door. The girl was lying in bed, with a blanket pulled over her head. The fan was on, although the house was cool. "Ellie, are you sick?" There was no answer. Sarah came closer, sat on the edge of the bed, and touched her daughter's shoulder. She flinched and jerked her hand away. "Hey, it's okay. It's me," Sarah said quietly. "I just wanted to surprise you. I got the day off today." Ellie slowly peeked out from under the blanket. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Sarah felt her insides tighten. "Were you crying?" "No," Ellie answered too quickly. "I just didn't sleep." "Something happened? Problems at school?" "No." Sarah noticed that her daughter was holding her hand unnaturally, as if hiding it. She gently took her wrist and saw a bruise. Not just a light mark, but a deep one, with a yellow and blue tint. On the wrist, as if someone was holding her tightly. "Where is this from?" "I fell," the girl muttered. Sarah frowned. She knew her daughter. Ellie was never the type to fall or get bruised. She was careful, neat. "Where did you fall?" "At school. On the stairs." Sarah froze for a second. Something didn't add up. Ellie was avoiding her gaze. She didn't just look scared. She looked scared to the core. Sarah pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead. Her temperature was normal. "Ellie, look at me." She slowly raised her eyes. "Did someone hurt you?" Silence. Long. Ellie nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Sarah's heart began to pound. She tried not to show it, not to scare it. "Is this someone from school?" Another nod, but this time it's negative. Sarah felt her breath catch. Dozens of possibilities flashed through her mind. "Who? Can you tell me who it is?" "No," Ellie whispered, and then, "Please, don't make me." "Ellie," he said, "if I tell him, he will do something to you." Sarah felt her head buzzing. "Who is he?" She hugged her daughter close, feeling her shudder. "No one will harm me, do you hear? I will protect you." Ellie was silent. She was shaking all over. as if there was an electric current under the sheet. Sarah went down to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. She poured herself some water and sat down at the table. She thought about who she might suspect. Was there anyone in their circle who gave her the slightest doubt? Josh came to mind. The neighbor across the street. An old family friend, a widower. He helped around the house, fixing the faucet, installing shelves, sometimes picking Ellie up from school when Sarah was on duty. Always smiling, overly polite. He was too convenient. And then one episode popped into Sarah's head. A few weeks ago, she went into Ellie's room, and she quickly removed something from the tablet screen. At the time, she didn't pay attention to it, and then her daughter asked several times not to leave her alone at home. Sarah pulled out her phone. She dialed the number, Mark Stevens, a police officer she knew. They had been friends since college, and he always said, "If you feel something is wrong, it's better to be safe than sorry." "Mark, hi, I need help, really serious, just between us." He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He said, "I'll be with you in half an hour." Sarah went upstairs. Ellie was asleep. There were traces of tears on her face, and even in her sleep her lips were pursed, as if she were expecting a blow. Sarah sat down next to her and stroked her hair. She didn't know all the details, but she felt that the truth was worse than she could imagine. And she swore that whoever it was would never hurt her child again. And if the system cannot stop it, it will do it itself. Sarah couldn't sleep. After Ellie's revelations, everything inside her had turned upside down. Her daughter lived in fear, every day, every night, and she didn't notice, didn't hear. She was there and yet blind. The next morning, Sarah went out into the garden to talk to Mark. He was dressed as a civilian, not in uniform. He didn't want to scare Ellie. Sarah told him the little she could gather. Someone close to them, a grown man, who had probably been to their house before. Ellie was afraid to name him. She said he had threatened to harm Sarah. Mark listened in silence. "Do you have any suspicions?" he asked finally. Sarah hesitated, but then answered, "Josh Hayden, our neighbor. You know him. He used to be here a lot, helping out when I was at work. Polite, courteous. Ellie used to trust him." Mark pressed his lips into a thin line. "I remember this guy. There was one strange episode a few years ago. A complaint from a family from another area, but it didn't go to court. The girl's mother dropped her claims. Everything was closed due to lack of evidence. Officially, clean. Unofficially, questionable. Do you think he could? I think we need to be very careful and start collecting evidence. Any kind." In the evening, Sarah came into Ellie's room. The girl was sitting on the floor, next to a box of drawings. She was silently sorting through them, as if looking for something. Sarah sat down next to her. "Ellie, I know this is hard for you, but we need to figure out who it is. I need to know who to be afraid of." "He'll know I told him." The voice was as quiet as the rustling of paper. "He won't know. I won't tell anyone your name, and you can only talk to me when you're ready. But the longer we remain silent, the longer he's free. And he shouldn't be free. Do you understand?" Ellie nodded, and as if overcoming something inside herself, whispered, "This is Josh. He started with compliments. Then he started coming when you weren't there. He said that if I told you, you would die. He knows how." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the gut. She had to stop herself from jumping up and running straight to his house. "Has he ever touched you?" The girl nodded again. Sarah covered her hand with hers. They sat like that for a long time, in silence. That night, Sarah watched the footage from the security cameras around the house. Most of it was empty footage: dogs, children, delivery people. But there were 3 instances in the last week where it was clear. Josh approaching the house late at night. He didn't ring the doorbell. He just stood there. Once, he walked around the house and appeared at the back door. A few minutes later, he left. Sarah saved these fragments and sent them to Mark. An hour later, he called back. It's not enough for an arrest yet, but it's enough to start a case. I'll start with a report. Record the video as suspicious behavior. We need more. What else can you do? I'll try to get a warrant for his phone or laptop. If we find anything there, it'll be a serious reason. Does he know that we suspect something? Not yet. But believe me, people like him sense danger. He'll start to panic soon. He might try to hide, put pressure on you, change his behavior. That's why you have to be on your guard, and don't leave Ellie alone. The next day, Ellie didn't go to school. Sarah called the office and took the day off. They spent the whole day at home, making pancakes, watching old cartoons, talking about trivial things. Sarah tried to create a sense of security, although inside everything was seething. Later, when Ellie went to bed, Sarah looked at her tablet. With permission. The girl said, "You can look. There are messages on there. I didn't delete everything." Sarah opened the correspondence. Much had been erased, but a few fragments from the anonymous account remained. The phrases were cautious, but that only made it scarier. "You don't want Mom to get hurt, do you? No one will believe the child. They will say you made it all up. If you keep quiet, everything will be fine. We are friends." The screenshots were sent to Mark. He confirmed that it would be possible to try to identify the sender by IP, especially if it was linked to his main account. "We're close," he said. "But it's important not to rush. If we hurry, the lawyer will wipe the case. Your job now is to maintain stability. Protect it. Don't let him know we're gathering a network." Sarah nodded, but inside she was already seething with rage, and if the police couldn't stop him, she would do it herself. 2 days later, Sarah sat in the police station interview room. Mark was next to her, and in front of her was a female juvenile detective, Lieutenant Harper. Ellie had not yet been brought in. Sarah had insisted that her daughter be questioned only in the presence of a child psychologist, and only if absolutely necessary. On the table lay a flash drive with video recordings, screenshots of correspondence, and scans of a medical examination conducted by a familiar doctor in a private clinic. Everything was drawn up according to the rules. Marks on the body, descriptions of the condition, a psychiatrist's conclusion, trauma, anxiety, signs of systematic intimidation. Harper looked through the materials in silence, only occasionally making notes. "You understand," she finally spoke. "If we make a mistake, if it turns out that this is a misunderstanding, we will ruin a person's life." Sarah sat up straight. "What if we're not wrong? What if we do nothing and he hurts someone else? Or comes back to my daughter?" Harper looked at her straight. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. But we need to do everything strictly according to protocol." Mark intervened. "We already have the bare minimum for preliminary proceedings. Alarming actions, video, circumstantial evidence. This is enough to start surveillance. Request a warrant for electronic devices. Interrogate him. For now, as a witness." Harper nodded. "Let's start with this. But be prepared. This may take time." Sarah returned home late at night. Ellie was already asleep. She quietly went into her room to check if everything was okay. A fox-shaped nightlight was burning on the windowsill. Her favorite toy was lying next to her pillow. For a moment, everything seemed normal, ordinary, but only for a moment. Sarah didn't sleep almost all night. Every rustle seemed suspicious. She kept her phone with her, the remote control for the alarm in her other hand. Towards morning, she finally dozed off on the sofa in her clothes. The phone call woke her up. "It's me," Mark's voice said. He felt something was wrong. "Who?" "Josh. This morning he came to the station himself. Said he was slandered, and they are trying to make him out to be a rapist. He was aggressive, threatened to file complaints." "Damn," Sarah breathed. "Does he know we're digging into him now?" "Unofficially, yes. But that only strengthens the position. We received permission to search his home and electronics. We'll come in with a warrant tomorrow morning. The main thing is to hold out through the night." Sarah wanted to ask if he could come and stay, but Mark was already risking his career by helping her outside of protocol. "I can handle it," she said. "For Ellie, I can handle it." The night had been particularly hard. First, Sarah heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. Then a silhouette flashed outside the windows. The alarm was silent, as were the cameras. She checked everything. Nothing. But the feeling of anxiety did not go away. Closer to midnight, someone knocked on the kitchen window. Sarah, holding a kitchen knife, carefully approached and looked out. The shadow had disappeared. She called Mark. He said he would arrive in 20 minutes. He told her to barricade the doors and not to open them to anyone. When he arrived, they walked around the area. There were no tracks, but Sarah was sure. It was him, checking how prepared they were. The next morning at 6 o'clock, the police came to Josh with a warrant. Sarah did not see the arrest, but Mark called immediately. They took him, without resistance, so far under the pretext of storing potentially compromising materials. They found some of the correspondence with the girls, including Ellie. He thought he had deleted everything, but we restored it. So, that's it. This is just the beginning. The trial will follow. But you can breathe a sigh of relief. For a while, he won't come near your family. Sarah hung up and cried for the first time in days. Quietly. Alone. Not from fear, but from the fact that something had finally moved. When she told Ellie, the girl just nodded. No tears, no smile. Her face was empty. She was sitting at the table drawing with a black pen, something like a castle with high walls. Sarah asked, "It's you?" Ellie nodded. "It's me." Inside, Sarah hugged her, held her close. She knew the worst was probably behind her, but the real fight was ahead. Sarah's house was quieter again, but not safer. Despite Josh's arrest, she was still worried. She knew how the system worked. A warrant was not a sentence. Temporary detention was not protection. Josh was being held for 48 hours. If the prosecutor did not bring charges with a solid evidence base within that time, he would be released on his own recognizance. This is exactly what happened on the second day. Mark called her at sunset. He left, under control, but without a bracelet. The court has not yet given permission to restrict movement. He knows he has problems, but for now he remains free. What does this mean? Sarah clutched the phone as if she could break it. It means, be extremely careful. I have already made a request for emergency security, but the process is not fast. For now, alarm, locks, and do not be left alone. Sarah didn't tell him that she and Ellie were already alone. There were no relatives nearby, no friends to trust with such a situation. They locked the doors, the windows, turned on the security system, but the feeling that someone was nearby did not go away. That night, Ellie had trouble sleeping. Sarah lay next to her. She couldn't let herself sleep. She felt something was going to happen. And this something happened at 3:41 a.m. The alarm went off. There was a sound of breaking glass. The back door. Sarah jumped up, clutching her phone and pepper spray. She rushed to the window, saw a figure making his way into the house. Dark clothes, a hood, something glittering in his hand. She rushed into Ellie's room, locked herself in with her. She called Mark. "He's here, in the house." He broke in. "I'm on my way. The police are already on the line. 5 minutes." Sarah hugged Ellie close. "Quiet. We are with you. We are not alone." There were footsteps outside the door. Slow. A knock on the wall, the click of the lock on the first floor, and the voice. "Sarah, open up. I just want to talk. This is all a mistake." His voice was distorted, muffled, as if from deep water. Sarah covered Ellie's ears with her hands. She herself was shaking, not from fear, but from tension, like a string. Footsteps ascended to the second floor. "I know you're there, and no one will help you. You shouldn't have interfered, Sarah. We could have lived like before." He tried to open the door. It was closed. He started hitting it with his shoulder. Sarah had already raised the canister. With her other hand, she was squeezing the panic button on the alarm panel, which was supposed to send a duplicate call to the panel. "Get away from the door, Josh!" she screamed. "The police are on their way!" He didn't answer. Just another blow, and suddenly everything became quiet. A second. Another. Silence. Then, the crash of glass in the corridor. Something fell. A creak. Steps. Running down. 40 seconds later, the sound of sirens was heard. Josh was detained right on the lawn. He tried to escape through the neighbor's yard, but was in a state of shock. He had a knife and gloves with him. He screamed that he just wanted to explain himself, that it was all revenge, envy, that she ruined his life. The police took him to the station, this time for attempted illegal entry with a weapon, threats, and violating the terms of his release. This was no longer just psychological pressure. It was a real, physical risk. Mark flew into the house about 10 minutes after the police. "Everyone okay?" He looked at Sarah and Ellie. Sarah nodded. Ellie sat hugging the fox, silently, as if in a trance. But when she saw Mark, for the first time in all this time, she reached out and hugged him. The morning passed at the station. Interrogations, signatures, protocols. Sarah felt like a machine, answering questions, signing papers, nodding. The only thing that kept her in reality was Ellie's hand, squeezing her fingers. By lunchtime, official confirmation had arrived. Josh had been arrested, and the court had ordered him to remain in custody pending the investigation. "We've won the first battle," Mark said. "But there's a process ahead. A long, painful one. Are you ready?" Sarah looked at Ellie. The girl was asleep in her lap, her face relaxed for the first time in days. "We are not ready, but we will fight." They returned home that evening. The house was empty, but it no longer seemed so dangerous. Sarah knew she had protection now, but even more, the will to protect herself. She couldn't give back what had been stolen from her daughter, but she could be there every day. And Ellie, for the first time in a long time, said before going to bed, "Thank you for hearing me, Mom." 3 months have passed. The trial of Josh Hayden was proceeding as usual. Prosecutors had gathered enough evidence that the judge refused to grant bail. The case was transferred to the district court, where a full trial would begin. Ellie did not testify directly in the courtroom. The prosecutor insisted that her interrogation take place via video link in the presence of a psychologist. She endured it with dignity, restraint. She answered questions despite her fear. After the session, she left the room with an even face, not as a winner, but as a person who is no longer a victim. Sarah sold her car, quit her job, and cut back on all her expenses. She realized that her main task now was to be with her daughter. Every week they went to a therapist together, had family sessions and individual sessions. At first, Ellie barely spoke, only drew. But the psychologist explained, "This is also a dialogue, just not with words." One day, Sarah noticed a color appearing in one of the drawings. First, pale blue, then yellow, then green, and one day, pink. "Is this a fox?" she asked, pointing to the drawing. "No," Ellie said. "It's me." Sarah held back her tears. At school, Ellie first studied remotely. Then she switched to part-time work, coming to classes twice a week. The teachers were warned. Nothing was explained to her classmates. At first, the girl kept to herself. But one day, during a literature lesson, when they were discussing where the wild things are, Ellie raised her hand. She said that sometimes the monster is not outside, but nearby. And no one understood what she was talking about. But after the lesson, a girl came up to her and simply said, "You are strong." This was the first step. Mark didn't disappear. He kept helping, being there. Not as a cop, as a friend. He often picked them up on weekends, grilled burgers with Ellie, took them to the park. Sarah saw her daughter laugh for the first time in a long time. Really. Without a trace of fear, without a defensive mask. And it was during this period that Sarah developed a new purpose. She didn't want to go back to the hospital. Her calling had changed. She began attending local support groups for mothers who had gone through similar experiences. At first, she simply listened. Then she began to talk. A couple of weeks later, a woman came up to her after a meeting and said, "The way you tell your story is like you're telling my story. Thank you." This is how the Safe Hearth Project was born, a small non-profit initiative that Sarah launched with 2 other women. They helped mothers, children, held meetings, went to schools, taught how to recognize warning signs. Mark got his colleagues involved. Volunteer lawyers appeared. Soon, even the city news blog was talking about them. In the spring, Ellie came to Sarah with a statement. "I want to go back to school, full-time, and to a club. Drawing." Sarah did not answer at once. Her heart was filled with both joy and anxiety, but she only nodded. "Of course. Only if you're ready." "I'm ready." And she was ready. Her work won 3rd place at the school exhibition. It showed a girl standing on the edge of a cliff, and behind her was a huge figure of a woman, almost transparent, like a shadow. In the corner was the inscription, "Mom is my shield." Sarah held her diploma and couldn't stop crying. While the trial was going on, while Josh was under arrest, while life was getting better, Sarah understood the main thing. Evil does not disappear, even if it is punished. It can take other forms, other faces. But now she knew how to recognize it. And most importantly, she is no longer alone. Her daughter is nearby. Her friends are nearby. Nearby are those whom she can now help. And when one day Ellie, passing by Sarah, said, "I love our home again," Sarah realized, this is not the end. This is the beginning.